the event tonight is, first things first, we are launching our online exhibition, Found in Translation, which has its own dedicated website, and you will find the link to that in the chat, so that if you've got a big enough screen, you could pull it up and have a look at all the work while we're chatting. We planned it as a real life show, which is going to happen in April, but obviously that got cancelled, or actually most likely postponed. So we were going to be defeated by lockdown, and we decided we would do something virtually. What we're going to do, first of all, is have an introduction from Isabel Seligman, who is the Bridget Riley Art Foundation exhibition curator in the Prints and Drawings Department of the British Museum. And she's been heading a program designed to introduce more people, especially students, to the joys of both the British Museum's collection and actually drawing from the collection and learning from it. And that's how the project, which underpins all this work, began when we were all doing an MA at Wimbledon, and we had our first trip to the British Museum and loved it so much we decided we wanted to carry on. Then after Isabel's intro, each of the 8 artists whose work is in the show is going to talk about their work just for a couple of minutes. And then if there's time and energy, because I know how exhausting Zoom meetings are, we can have some Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to try and find Isabel and hand over to her if she would like to unmute herself. Isabel, I've lost you. Hi. Over to you, Isabel. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much to everyone for being here digitally. So yes, my name is Isabel Seligman, and I'm the Bridget Riley Art Foundation curator at the British Museum, which is the national collection of prints and drawings. So they have about 50,000 drawings and over 2 million prints, from Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo all the way through to Tracy Emin and Grayson Perry. So chances are, if you're into art, there's something there for everyone. But the most important thing about this collection really is the study room, where anyone can go and look at these works. You don't have to be a student, you don't have to be a UK citizen. Literally anyone can bring along some ID, and using our online
started breaking, but now it stopped when I was coming down the stairs.
Isabel, could you just stop a minute? Please, could everybody mute themselves? If you don't know how to do it, I'm going to mute you all anyway, because there's too much background noise.
Is that better?
I can see some muting going on, so yeah, please carry on. Thanks, Isabel.
No. So anyone can come along to the study room and see any of the prints and drawings that they'd like. And the reason why Bridget Riley wanted to fund this project is because she herself came to the study room as a student, and she says that all of her discoveries in painted abstraction were actually due to this really formative period of her life as a student, where she was looking at drawings by Seurat and Cézanne and things which she perhaps wouldn't think of as being very close to her own work, but actually really looking at them and drawing from them was the key to her kind of discovering herself as an artist. So that was really the kind of spirit behind this project, where we encourage students to come into the study room and to choose, initially we select works for them to try and show them the kind of range of the collection and what there is to choose from. But then as the project progresses, usually we ask the students to choose their own work. And that's a really important part of the process, because as well as drawing from the drawings and trying to find out how they work and what makes them tick, artists are also trying to find out about themselves, that by sort of selecting the works and working out what it is about them that interests them, that's a way of finding out about their own practice. And I think all of the artists are going to talk about their own work shortly, but just to pick out two artists, for example, Janine Hall, who is looking at the work of Cornelia Parker, a British artist looking at printmaking and the effects of light on glassware. Cornelia Parker herself, in her series of prints, was actually looking further back to Henry Fox Talbot, who was one of the kind of pioneers of photography and using glass to kind of explore the potential of photography and creating images with light. Or, for example, Sue's work when she was looking at Keith Coventry, another contemporary British artist, who was himself, again, looking back to an even earlier artist, Giorgio Morandi, and his way of using line to create tone. So really, I'm not going to talk for much longer, but I think the HB group has really been one of the project's biggest successes, and they're certainly the group who's come most regularly and for kind of serious periods of time, and really embracing the spirit of the project and the possibilities that it offers. So I just wanted to say congratulations to all of them, and I'm excited to hear them talking about their work, which is really brilliant.
Thank you very much, Isabel. One of the things I found really interesting last year was at the Bridget Riley show at the Hayward, there was a section of sort of earlier works, including drawings. And it was really interesting to see how she had drawn from other people's drawings. And the fact that at one level, there's sort of apparently no connection between that and what people think of as her work, you know, the stripes and the abstraction. But the more you do it yourself, the more you realize that it comes in sometimes very subtle ways, because I think all of us are going to show some different explanations to that connection between what we've studied at the British Museum and our own work. Okay, so the first artist I'm going to turn to is Ali Christie, who is here somewhere. Hello, Ali. Would you like to unmute yourself? And then, hopefully.
I'm unmuted now.
You're unmuted. Now, I mean, Ali, you really love portraiture, and it's what we've sort of seen most of in your work. But I know there's a very special personal drawing in the work you've got in the gallery this time.
Yeah, I've ever since I went to art college in the 80s, a long time ago, I did a lot of life drawing, and then when I did my MA, I came to do portraiture, which was a really different technique, because I tend to use very economy of line in my life drawing, charcoal and pencil. And I saw this lovely picture of by Maggie Hamblin of her dying mother. Well, she did quite a few from what I can gather. So I was looking for things that I wanted to use and try and draw and get some ideas of how to draw differently, with portraiture. And so I saw that and thought, oh, she uses loads of lines in that. So I'd like to have a go at that. So I copied that one day. And sadly, my dad's not been very well for a long time, but he's quite old. And well, he's died now, but he died on New Year's Day this year. And the day before, I went down and I said to him, can I draw you? When he was, he clearly was on his, not very well at all. He said, yes, of course you can. And I actually ended up taking a few photos, which seemed a bit strange at the time, but actually I'm quite pleased I did, because it's been quite cathartic to carry on, and I probably will do some more. So I started off drawing in the sort of loose way that the Maggie Hamblin picture was done, and then from that I thought, no, I actually want to do some more. So I went on to charcoals and charcoal dust, and I felt that gave him a different feel. Yeah, and that was it really. I love coming to the British Museum, and I find there's always something to draw, and you always get something from even if it's not the picture you chose and you sneak off and use somebody else's, then that you can always get something from that. And sometimes I look back at those and think, oh, that's really interesting. Maybe I'll go and look at something that leads to something else, is what I was saying.
Yeah.
And the picture of Lala, any excuse to draw my dog, I probably will take. That's me. Yeah, and I shall continue drawing her forever.
Thank you. That the drawing of your father, the way you've done it, it has that sort of ethereal feel to it that I think is there in the Maggie Hamling drawing as well, of sort of somebody. It's a very particular way of capturing somebody in the state that they're in. So yeah, very special drawing. Thank you. Okay, Cara.
It's nice to talk to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cara, I'm gonna ask you to speak next. Where are you?
Yeah, I've just unmuted
You've
myself.
unmuted yourself. Lovely.
Okay.
Yes.
You've got your screen is frozen, so I don't know. Yes, you're back
well,
again.
Just go for it, Cara.
Okay. I can see you, Sue, so rather than me. Don't really know where to begin. I've got what's great about this exhibition is the overriding concept of visiting the British Museum, the V&A, and the National Gallery, and the nature of those visits, and kind of straddled two projects with this the pieces that are in the gallery. The first piece was right back at the beginning when I was doing my MA, which is where we all met. The trip was to the National Gallery, so it was along the same lines, but it wasn't in a study room. It was choosing a piece from the National Gallery, and the notion of exploring a piece of art, and it's not just a question of doing transcribing it, what you see, and doing a copy, which could just as well be a photograph. Really, it's about feeling your way into the drawing and actually having some quiet communion with the drawing. And like Isabel mentioned, something about you see artworks, and it's about noticing what you're noticing about the piece, which kind of takes you into a different place. So you might find yourself, it's quite a meditative thing when you're in the process, but it's not a kind of a vacant meditation. It's a really focused meditation where you're, like I said, noticing what you're noticing. So that the Van Eyck painting in the National Gallery, what struck me about it, of course, it's tiny. It's really not very big at all, and there's always a massive crowd of people around it. And when you kind of fight your way through and you get to have a look at it, it's so compelling for such a tiny portrait from 1433, and it completely blew my mind that it was such a long period of time between the painting of it and when I was looking at it, and this direct gaze was so incredibly compelling. But what interested me, that project was very much probably a lot more of a direct looking at that particular painting. But what I was interested in trying to do, on the information on the gallery, on the artist's page, there are more images. What it was I was interested in my process of looking, so I was returning to the same painting again and again and again and doing repeated studies, and the way that these studies varied, even though it's the same painting, what's different is me on a different day, my moods when I'm looking at the painting, and the way in which I'm noticing something different, perhaps. The similarities and the differences, it's very interesting when you kind of put these things all together. And the other element that I was interested in was capturing a sense of I've said in my writing, I'm always very interested in X-rays, so what's underneath the surface. So obviously we're all engaging with the surface of a painting or a drawing, a work of art when we're looking at it, but there's something beyond. So I was trying to create something which had a sense of penetrating through that surface and crossing time, crossing those centuries. So yes, finding your way into different artworks. Obviously walking into the National Gallery, it's quite overwhelming number of artworks to choose from. The difference that then going to the British Museum is having the opportunity to have a little browse on the online catalogue, and you're still in free fall because there's still so many thousands of things to choose from. So you kind of, it's like a lucky dip, and on the other trips to the V&A as well, it's even more of a lucky dip because when they pull it out of the archives, you get a whole box of images. You get whichever box your item is in to study, you've actually got an additional number of things. So like Ali was saying, when we go as a group, we're able to see everybody else's choices and find something that we wouldn't have picked ourselves, or we wouldn't have known about. So you find interesting routes in that way. But also the beautiful spaces that you get in the study rooms, they're wonderfully quiet, and you really focus in on what you're looking at. The British Museum trip, the piece of artwork in the show that's from the British Museum, is more of a kind of a lateral step away from the original thing that I was looking at, but it's very much, it contains this whole thread of thought, or the things that I was thinking about when I was looking, and what I noticed, like Isabel said, what I was noticing about what I was noticing, the marks, the measurements, the lines, and which very much tied into what I'd been looking at prior to the trip, and being able to kind of think through and around and in different directions to somebody else's thinking. That's the fascinating thing about being able to go and see a range of artworks in the study rooms, and the tangible quality as well of seeing something so up close, not behind glass, you know, and there it is. And when we were there, Isabel brought out a Van Gogh ink drawing, an amazing drawing, just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing, you know, and that had just been, is there, tucked away, not on display. It's not something that we had expected to see. And she said, oh, come and have a look at this. And it's just the range of marks, and seeing it up close like that, it was so inspiring. And I've actually used that same image doing tutoring for drawing, explaining things about line and the variation of line and so on. It's so enriching to be able to see all these range of artworks and pick things, and it gets processed in our own minds and comes out in a very enriched way. So I don't really want to further on, but the concept is wonderful, and the HB drawing group getting together and going to these things is so motivating, and the impetus is wonderful. So the whole project's I've been really enjoyed being able to do it. I have dipped in and out for various reasons, but it's lovely to return to it. And it's very kind of grounding and helpful for moving forwards as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I really encourage you all, I guess, to have a look at the artist pages on the Found in Translation website, because I think you'll find it really interesting to see, say, with Cara's work, that how enriching it's been over several years now, and that going back to the Van Eyck, you know, you actually reworked your ideas again this year, and that sense of the connection back that Isabel talked about and forward in our own work is really valuable. Thank you. Okay, Denise, I'm going to turn to you next, if you'd like to unmute yourself. And
hi, everybody.
Very intriguing work. Very interesting backstory.
Okay, it's been a great pleasure to work with HB Drawing. I started visiting them just before lockdown, visiting the V&A with them just before lockdown. So that's where the piece of work that I'm showing with them comes from, and I developed it having been really inspired by coming together with them, talking with my colleagues and peers and looking through their collections of what they'd selected as well as mine. It's working with an archive is something that I've done previously when I was studying at Wimbledon. So I've worked with the Line of Thought collection, which Isabel curated. Where's Isabel gone? Yeah. And rolled out workshops, and that was such a pleasure just to be able to see the relationship between the works and how they pinged off each other in new and fascinating ways every time. I've also been to the British Museum separately and made a body of work from a Paula Modersohn-Becker tiny little print, produced a massive body of work inspired and triggered by that. So that is the real value of these visits to archives as far as I'm concerned. Thanks very much for the opportunity to have access to these archives. It's a regular trip normally, isn't it, that groups of artists gather with you, HB Drawing Sue, yeah. I felt very welcome, and yeah, gratitude for that. My particular piece of work, I'll just say quickly, was from looking at a folio of Hogarth prints. I particularly was looking for how he constructed the space and you know, the composition and the line qualities, how that was embedded in the narratives and the kind of satirical critiques that a lot of his works in that series, it was embedded within that, really. From looking at the folio of about 40 large-scale prints at the V&A, I selected 4 and then narrowed it down and pushed it and pulled it through digital and analog processes, making patterns in the end. And I think there's some resonance with the fact that flattening the perspective and looking at the surface quality of it was some resonance to be working at home, really, and the context of this as a digital presentation. I'll stop there. Great. I love it. More.
Okay, we'll do more just for you then, Denise. Yeah. Thank you. And Janine, not to take you too much by surprise, but if we could go to you, and you've got 3 drawings in the gallery here, and they're very different in style. Obviously, having seen the artists that you've been studying in the British Museum, I can sort of see how you've drawn something from each of them and incorporated into your own way, very special way of working.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I wanted to say how special the British Museum days are, and that although we only do them once a month, we've been doing them for over 2 years now. And apart from the fact that it holds the group together, which was one of our first projects, it's one of these things that is, the learning is like a sort of drip feed, if you like, and it goes on quietly without you realizing it happens. And some of it is obviously from looking at the work that you choose and the work that other people choose. And also when Isabel and Sarah Jaffrey also talk about individual pieces of work, you learn so much. So there's sort of different learning processes going on within the whole day. Can you still, I've got a sort of funny symbol on the screen. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. The drawings that I have in the show kind of reflect the areas that I've been interested in for a while, which is shadows, light, reflections and fleeting moments, really. And that can be quite broad in subject matter. So another thing is that I live in London close to the Thames, so I often walk along the river. And so some of the drawings I've been getting out have been about water and reflections and shadows. I've looked at Peter Doig, the Blotter series, and as Isabel mentioned, Cornelia Parker, I got absolutely fabulous drawings or prints of, I think there was a jug with ice cubes that had fallen over with melting with water, and the stacked glasses, which are quite beautiful. And then it sort of led me on to James McNeill Whistler, whose work I really love. And I think I drew an original drawing at the British Museum and then another one at the V&A, which were drawings that he'd done after walking in the dusk along the River Thames, and then had to rush home to produce a piece of work because he got so excited about it. And so the looking to Barnes drawing is one when again I was walking along the River Thames at dusk, and then just happened to see this image in front of me, which I just said, God, that's a Whistler. I must try and have a go. And so I took several shots of it and whatever. And there's a particular work of his that I really love, which is I think they're called the Nocturne series. And it's the Nocturne, I think I've got it written down here somewhere, Nocturne Blue and Gold, I think it is, Battersea Bridge. So although there's not a massive bridge as in this particular work, there is a bridge that I managed to get in the shot. And so for me, it was interesting to see if I could do a James McNeill Whistler, if you like. Also the glasses one, apart from the influence from Cornelia Parker, James McNeill Whistler had done this really beautiful small etching of a champagne glass. So that got me going. I always like glass anyway. I'm always buying it in junk shops. I used to be buying it in junk shops anyway. And they make the most marvellous shadows. And so I was interested in drawing the glasses and looking at how one can take the sharp, when something's very in focus, if you like, and then how it fades out of focus, and kind of asking myself, can I do this? It's a bit of a challenge, if you like. And that also applied to the white light on black water, which is whether I can get the image to shimmer. So I didn't want it to sparkle, I wanted it to shimmer. So it's actually, and I think a lot of James McNeill's work has that kind of fineness from something that's very, very fine to pale to very, very dark. And it's that kind of transition that I find quite interesting. It's all in pencil. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the drawings really. But I do want to say to Isabel how marvellous the British Museum is and how wonderful it's been for HB. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glynis. Not sure whether Glynis is here.
I'm unmuted.
Ah, you're here. Brilliant. And it sounds like there's no feedback. So
I've never done this before,
yeah.
So it's just like really nerve-wracking.
Well, that's right. It was
okay now?
Yeah, we can see you, we can hear you. It was worth sorting it out. So over to you, Glynis. Tell us about your drawing.
Well, it's had sons in IT. Okay, so the body of work that I'm showing in this exhibition started around thoughts of to do with social stigma, and it was, and I was thinking about thoughts to do with discrimination and those kind of things. And it's when I was thinking about stigma, I suddenly realised that stigma and stigmata are actually the same word. Stigmata is the plural of stigma. I never put the two words together. For me, stigmata was always to do with religion and things to do with the Bible. And so I thought it would be interesting to investigate in the museum how people historically had depicted stigmata, and that was my focal point for my studies. And I really love going to the museum and drawing with a group of people, because being an artist is quite a lonely situation, and so it's nice to come together with like-minded people. And I started looking at depictions of stigmata. I always went with a very specific element to look at. So, for example, when I was looking at the Hugh Howard drawing of the Crown of Thorns, I was thinking about, I wonder how this was constructed, because I wanted to make a sculpture of the Crown of Thorns, and I wanted to see how they wove the branches together. And subsequently I made the structure with pencils interwoven into it, and realized that the Roman soldiers must have had hands of leather, because it was a very painful sculpture to make. But it was an interesting exercise. And then I set about drawing the Crown of Thorns. And then I went to look at Dürer, whose work I've always really admired. And I looked at a woodblock where you're very restricted with how you draw when you're doing a woodblock, because you've got a chisel which you cut with. And so my focus was on the mark making, and I was particularly interested to see how he used the contour lines to describe the form of the branches all interwoven together. So the Crown of Thorns, which I've been looking at in my studies in the National Museum, is an object that carries a lot of symbolism. It symbolises suffering, it symbolises mocking, and I use it in my artwork as a framework on which to hang other items which signify aspects of social stigma. It's a kind of marriage between the two, and my hopes are that it might provoke thought or spark a conversation around social stigma. So that's what my work's about, that's in the exhibition. But I just want to say I have really enjoyed studying the masters, and there's nothing like it, you know, and I feel my practice has really benefited from it. You look at a reproduction of an artwork and it's nothing like looking at the real thing. It's so exciting, and I just want to say thank you, Isabel and the British Museum, for allowing me the opportunity. I feel so privileged, and I hope it continues. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Glynis. Okay, Nick, you're up next, and almost couldn't be a bigger contrast to Glynis's work. So I remember seeing you doing a digital drawing on your brand new iPad Pro at the British Museum. It was really interesting to see how your mark making was relating to the woodcut print you were actually studying. And now we've got the further, you know, your own development of it.
Yes. So the can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. So the iPad Pro and the drawing with the pencil there was slightly due to my slight disorganisation of not bringing pencil and paper, and realising that I was like, oh, I have this tool here that I've never used before to do a drawing in the archive, and it worked really well for that particular piece. So I was really pleased that I'd forgotten my paper, which is good. And so one of the reasons, or one of the ways that I use the archive is to try and find artwork that shows dancing and movement. So how do you draw movement? How do you draw the dance? So I literally that's what I search, and it brings up, as Isabel said, there's just so many pieces of artwork. So it just brings up this amazing array of drawings and prints that have dancing and movement in them. And that's been fantastic, because quite often it's that artist I've never heard of before. So that's a really good way to get to know them. And then I just choose the ones that sort of speak to me and speak to my projects. And then I go in and I draw with different materials. And then take them away, and then sometimes you sit with them for quite a while, and then the development kind of starts. So with the one that's in the exhibition, the Waterloo Prom, comes from the woodcut from Jean-Emile Le Brier. And to me, it sort of just looked like Waterloo, which is what I'm sort of looking into, is that dance that we do as a commuter at train stations, especially Waterloo. And it just reminded me of the crowds as you're following them and you're going around. So I did my own, it was a lino cut, and it's a soft lino cut because I just find you can be far more expressive with the lines. So I basically I was inspired by that woodcut to do my own dance that is Waterloo. And the one that's in the exhibition is one of the early stages, and it's progressed, but it's in lockdown. So it's been locked in Kingston print room because of the corona, which is, so the one on the right, the crowd noise, is also a development of the same idea. You know, how do you, when you walk into a really busy station, can you almost feel the noise? Can you see the noise? So that's what I was trying to do with that one as well. But yeah, I just think the whole project is an amazing way to just delve into how much artwork is there, to find it and to use it. I love going with the group. It is really inspiring to be around everyone and just to see what work they're doing, as everyone said before. So yeah, loving it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Isvan. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. And hopefully, if we are able to put on a show in real life, you might be able to release your later versions from their prison,
yes,
Kingston Uni, and let them loose in the world.
Yes, I'd love to.
Lovely. Okay, Roz, it's you up next if you'd like to unmute yourself. And the work in here, I think it's another really interesting illustration, as with several people, particularly Cara's talking about how much you can get out of studying one, you know, in quite small painting can actually generate a whole load of work in different directions.
Yes, because this show was going to be viewed online rather than in a physical space, I actually took the opportunity to almost do a retrospective of the 4 years. We've had the privilege to work with the British Museum and the National Gallery and the Victoria and Albert. And it's been really interesting to go back and realise just how many different bodies of work were generated. I've written a little piece about that on the website, which you can read, but it basically all started with a tiny, tiny painting called Rhinoceros at an Exhibition by Pietro Longhi in the National Gallery from the 1700s. And that led me through to Isabel producing Dura's original wood engraving and drawing of his rhinoceros, which then was amazing, because I mean, you just sit there and it's centuries and centuries old and it's right in front of you and you can breathe it and feel it and experience it. And looking at all the mark making, I'll talk briefly about this because I don't actually talk about it on the website. Looking at all the mark making, he'd never seen a rhinoceros, and it was all verbal explanations and letters that he drew it from, which if you first, I mean, everybody knows the image, it's very iconic, it's used on t-shirts, all sorts of things. But because he didn't know the mark making, it was quite obvious that people had said to him, oh, its ears are like a pig. Oh, it's got something on its body that looks like a seashell. Oh, it's got... So I then decided, from my original Little Rhinoceros in 2016, the Pietro Longhi, which is a tiny, tiny luminous painting, I'd had this yen to draw a life-size rhinoceros. And preferably, what I'd really like to have done is rob a real rhinoceros, because I'm very frottage and robbing. And this gave me the opportunity. So these sort of thoughts were going through my head. And I decided it would be great if I replicated Dura's rhinoceros but I did it the size of a baby rhinoceros, which is quite big. I mean, it's ended up as a 2-metre drawing. But to replicate his marks, I wandered around the house and found objects that looked exactly like the mark making he'd made. So my final drawing is a texture drawing, and it was originally 3-dimensional, but it's gone flat with the weight of it. So it's much flatter than it was, but basically its whiskers are my outside hard brush rubbed, and it has shells rubbed into it, and it has my mother's jewellery, and it has the bottom of pans and all sorts of things. And so my mark making replicates completely his mark making, I hope. But as I say, it was just so amazing to actually work with the original. And the original is tiny, it's only sort of A4 size, which again is quite a nice contrast with what I ended up doing. So I was very much sort of going back over and looking at the drawings, partly because what I'm working on at the moment is still in the melting pot. I haven't actually decided what I'm going to do. So what I was going to talk about tonight was I'm kind of replicating people coming at the end. That always happens. It's sort of, it's the awe of working with this amazing archive that, you know, is centuries old and contemporary, as you know, right up to date, sort of 2019, possibly. Isabella has now got 2020 drawings in her collection. And visiting the archive, it's so special. It's like time traveling, because it's a Victorian building and it's refreshingly flamboyant, very quiet, but it sort of enforces the specialness of the experience that we're all sharing. But I, unlike some of the others, I choose my drawings. I rarely choose a work for the image. It's sort of more loosely based on the ideas I'm interested in. And the online research I do at the museum, when you go on the websites, I mean, a couple of people have mentioned it, it's quite funny because what you put in and what you get out is quite interesting. And it's also unexpected and sometimes a real sort of, yay, you know, I didn't even think about that, because it presents you with something you hadn't even occurred, because you have to choose them before you go. I don't think anybody's actually said that. A couple of weeks before, you have to select what you want to draw from to give them a chance to go into the archive, which is enormous, and find it and lay it out ready for you. So I'm more interested in investigating sort of how, why, the mark making, the layers, the process. And I only ever work with a sketchbook for my museum visits. And when I'm working with the sketchbook, I tend to use the concertina ones, and looking at the drawings I've selected, it's sort of, it feels forensic, like following clues. And I quite often ask them to borrow a magnifying glass so you can get really into it. Sometimes I'm frustrated because you're only allowed to take a pencil in, and when of course the originals can be really exotic and be very complex media. For example, I've been working with Sean Bowen's drawings, and that's sort of multi-layered using delicate handmade paper, and then she makes holes in it and she goes from the front to the back, and she tears it, she stains it, there's pigments, there's symbols, there's doodles, she rotates it, she obviously sometimes draws one way up and then turns it the other way up, she's used delicate lasers, and she's even burnt it sometimes. So trying to translate that to a pencil is quite interesting, and obviously it changes the mood, but the whole process of drawing, whatever it is you're drawing, obviously you get new ideas and you get fresh interpretations. So at the moment I've been working with the Sean Bowen drawings, and then for the last couple of visits I've been working with Edward Burne-Jones, which is so different, but it's the subject matter. It's all about dolls and it's letters. Again, you get this wonderful book with these great letters in it, and they're to his niece Katie, and they're all about this doll, and his concerns about the doll are, you have to read them to believe them. So I'm hoping somehow to sort of encompass those two things for the work I'm playing with at the moment, which I'm hoping will come to fruition. Hopefully by the time we've got a physical show, which we're still hoping to do. So I'm hoping that I can somehow meld those two things together and have something interesting. Okay, that's all I have to say, except it's wonderful working with you all, and thank you, Isabella. And it's so great because we maintain that when you're on a course, you have all that wonderful sort of people just wandering up to you, looking what you're doing, and whether you ask for it or not, they tell you what they think, which is so helpful and so rewarding and makes you think about things in a very different way. So yes, that's replicated in this situation, and it's great to see what other people choose, and also the fact that, I can't remember who said that, you can then use what they've chosen if you see something in it that's different to why they've chosen it. So thanks very much for coming.
Lovely, thank you. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what you're producing for the real life show as well, Ross. Okay, moving on, Ruth. Ruth, would you like to unmute yourself and tell us about your two drawings? I mean, we all know you as somebody who walks in your local Suffolk countryside every day, so it's not surprising to see something that draws on that idea, but I know there's lots of new ideas and in fact new places in your two drawings.
Right, hi. Yeah, I'm the country bumpkin of everybody around. Everybody else lives in London, and I march through the woods and glorify in the freedom of that. And of course, the last few weeks definitely have been doing that. Going to the British Museum, as everyone says, has been amazing. We started off at the National Gallery, just walking through all the galleries, and I just got completely bamboozled. So I came back to John Constable, who lives down the road from me, or used to, obviously. And so a lot of his paintings are incredibly familiar. So then we had the opportunity to go to the archives in the British Museum. And I was just like, you know, confused. Where do I start? Where do I start? So I've honestly looked at so many different artists with so many different ways of drawing and representing their ideas. So full circle back to John Constable. And I just love his sketchbooks and the simple way, well, they're not simple, but he makes them look simple. The way he looks at and represents the things he is looking at. And of course, they're very precise. So I wanted a challenge. I decided that I would draw one of my walks. So to draw one of my walks, I decided I would draw the footprints or the forest floor of where I was walking. And so last autumn, as I was crunching my way through sweet chestnut woods and looking for the chestnuts that I could bring home and roast, I realised that just the fascination of all the different materials that had been dropped off the trees and just stacked up, and started doing some sketches. And then I thought, I've got to do this, I've got to take photographs. So from my photographs, I started drawing the drawings that, they were just studies. It started off as a study. And as I was studying, and I started realizing I was actually telling a story here. There was a lot more to it than that. So I then was telling the story, and then I thought, actually, I'm really using my imagination, the way I'm representing all this. So really, I was studying, telling a story, using my imagination, and like my walks, each mark was like the next, was instigating the next mark, like a walk. You go on a walk, you don't know where you're going, something interests you, fascinates you, and so you walk on in that direction. And the same with my drawing, which has always been like that. But these particular drawings, I really had to hold on to myself and sit there and really study. So I've never done anything quite so intricate as these two drawings. So the first drawing is the autumn drawing where I was looking for chestnuts. And then I was fortunate enough to go to Australia to a family wedding, and was walking through the undergrowth, the undergrowth of a wood in woodlands in Australia. And this was last autumn when all the fires were going on. So I was in New South Wales and would wake up in the morning and there was just a yellow sky. And so I thought, and then walking through the woods, and I thought, this is the material that is the sparks are flying on, and then it's so flammable. It's just creating more and more forest fires. And of course they don't have, like our leaves and fallen flora and everything, they just get eaten up and they go back into the soil. But they're so dry that they don't, and it stacks up and piles up. So there's a real depth of organic material, which is so dry, and the sparks come and suddenly the whole forest is on fire. So it was kind of all involved in that. And so I was again taking lots of photographs and came back, and the fires, as we all know, were raging for so long. So I just continued drawing and drawing and drawing. So that's where those two come from. Yeah, well, that's it really. So as everybody has already said, you know, amazing opportunity, and thank you so much, Isabel. You've been such a pleasure to work with. And then bumping into you in Paris, that was great. And the odd email where you've been very helpful, supporting me too. But also, just lastly, sorry, I'd just like to thank Sue, who's been absolutely phenomenal. Although I have been on the organising team, compared to Sue, I've done absolutely nothing. And Sue is just brilliant. Thank you so much. And also to thank Chris Keeble, who is Janine's husband, who always does our artwork. And I mean, to have him at our fingertips is great. Love you all. Thanks for coming. And thanks, my HB drawing crew. Love you all too very much. And let's keep going.
Thank you. Okay, we're nearly at the end. The last person is me. Alphabetically, we did it. So this whole project has been something that started off being quite scary for me. First time we went, as Isabel said, was when we were students. It was a group thing and you had to pick something. And that was quite tricky because basically we were going to do something that I had actively avoided doing, which was drawing from really good drawings. And essentially because I didn't think my drawing was good enough, because just because you're on an MA in drawing, it doesn't mean you can actually draw that well. So I decided to choose something that wasn't quite so scary, and I picked a sketchbook page, but it was by Dürer. But nonetheless, it wasn't like a finished drawing. It was a page that actually was had drawings on both sides, and were obviously bits and pieces. And one of the bits and pieces was a hand, and I had got into the habit of doing blind drawings of my left hand as a warm-up exercise. So I thought, hands, okay, I know something about hands. And even though we were only there for a day or half a day, it was sort of inspiring and awe-inspiring, but also so instructive. I immediately realized, yeah, I mean, I know why I've been avoiding doing this, but it'd be really good for me to understand more about how people make the marks that they do. And I very quickly felt, and I might be wrong, but I still have this feeling sometimes that when you're really sort of in the zone, that you are putting yourself somehow in the same kind of mental space as the artist. You're following their marks, and it's something to do with the rhythm of them. This is when we first started going as an HB group, when Janine organised this for us after graduation. I started studying some Turner drawings, and they were obviously preparatory drawings. Although the one I looked at most, there's no painting being identified from it. But I found it incredibly difficult even to discern what was in the drawing. Some of the lines were quite faint, and a lot of them would just kind of devolve into a series of dots or just kind of stop. And I looked at this drawing on 3 or 4 visits, and eventually, as I kind of copied it more and more effectively, I'd say, what came to my mind was, these feel like the marks and the drawings of somebody who is drawing to understand what they're seeing. And then once he's understood it, he just kind of drifts off. It's like, okay, I'm understanding how he was drawing barges on a wharf somewhere, and there's cranes and things behind, and then a bit of landscape. And it's like, what's happening here? Okay, I understand that now. I can just stop because I've understood it. So it's more about what he's seeing and what he's understanding than actually drawing a really precise drawing for somebody else to see. And then when I was studying the etching by Keith Coventry, the one that goes back to Giorgio Morandi, you've got almost the opposite. Instead of these lines that just drift off into nothing, there's this incredibly dense network of crosshatch lines that look like somebody is scribbling away for dear life, but it's not random. There's this element of control that creates an intelligible form, and also the tones. And the drawing I was studying, there's a little image of it on my page on the website, is actually, it's not very big, again, it's about sort of A4-ish size. And it's actually a set of crack pipes that are made of plastic water bottles with spouts. And when you're sort of studying it, you kind of stop seeing the object, and you're, you know, copying away. And again, it took me 3 or 4 visits to actually produce a drawing of this. So you're really focusing in on something, and then you're pulling back to see what you've got. And that style of drawing, which I used for the 2 drawings in the show of porter cabins at Clapham Junction and scaffolding at night down in Sussex, require that same sort of double aspect, that you need to control what you're doing, and then you get into a phase where you are hatching away for dear life to kind of get the darkest tone you can get, and you're pulling back. So there's one aspect of it that I really liked, that sort of push and pull of focus and stepping back. And I actually really enjoyed the fact that Keith Coventry had made this really lovely etching of these really sort of crummy objects. So when I saw these porter cabins at night while I was waiting for a train at Clapham Junction, I thought, yeah, they're these crummy objects, and sort of like the scaffolding and maybe like the crack pipes, they're supposed to be temporary buildings, but they've obviously been there forever and a day, but they're deteriorating, and they've got, you know, watermarks dribbled down the outside and bits falling off. So something that's very appealing to me about doing a very observational, slow drawing of these crummy things. You're sort of memorializing something that's supposed to be a temporary bodged job. And I started the porter cabin drawing before lockdown. I may even have finished it, I think. The scaffolding one, I started after lockdown, because I realized it took me a really, really, really long time, but I had lots of time. And I enjoyed that, being able to spend that time not feeling hurried over it. And in the end, I think there's something, yeah, quite sort of elegiac about memorializing these temporary things, and using a technique that's sort of derived from etching, but it's a very time-consuming thing to do with drawing. The last thing I'd like to say is that one of the things I love about the British Museum is, several people have said, is not quite knowing what you're going to get, and then not knowing what you're going to do with it. So I don't search by subject matter. I search sort of fairly randomly. And in common with so much else in like going to exhibitions, I never quite know what I'm going to enjoy and what's going to be really profitable. So sometimes I've chosen, you know, a Michelangelo drawing or something, a beautiful drawing. My copy of it is much less beautiful, but actually that hasn't been as productive for me as finding something randomly, or however, something that somebody else, particularly Janine, has picked, and getting something out of that process of drawing that just seeps into my own drawing, or that I really want to sort of seize on, and be able to do it over such an extended period of time has been wonderful. And it really has improved my drawing, which is, you know, is a good thing really for somebody who uses drawing a lot. And Isabel, I really hope that the opportunity at the British Museum is going to carry on, because I know that the programme you've been running is due to wind down, and we have our fingers crossed that something will emerge from that. Okay, so now you've heard from all of us. For those who might not have heard me say this at the beginning, there is a link to the website in the Zoom chat function if you fish around and find that button. Obviously, the website's permanent. It's going to be up there forever. So do have a browse around. We've been going on longer than I expected. So I kind of think maybe that we've exhausted our time for people staring at screens. So I'd like to say very, very special thank you to Isabel for joining us this evening and giving us an introduction. And you've contributed so much to what HB has done, been such a great supporter, and it's really helped to establish us as a group and keep us going. And it really does illustrate that drawing is the foundation of a lot of artistic practice. And we're great evangelists for it, and we're always telling people about the British Museum and the V&A and all the other resources. And we hope in time that other people will take advantage of them too, so that the powers that be know how much as artists we appreciate having those resources there. Thank you so much to everybody for coming. I hope you found it interesting. Have a look at the website, and we'll see you all soon, possibly in real life, in the fullness of time. So goodbye. I'm going to close the meeting now.